A soldier once shot Genghis Khan's horse out from under him. He nearly killed him. The soldier was captured and brought before Genghis. You would expect him to beg for mercy. He didn't. He stood there and said, "Yes, that was my arrow." And Genghis, instead of killing him, made him a general. And here's the part that may sound strange. That same Genghis would take men who handed him his enemies, men who delivered him easy victories without a fight, and have them executed on the spot. At first glance, those decisions make no sense. But underneath them was a single principle, and it explains everything. The Genghis Khan most of us carry around is simple: a barbarian. A bloodthirsty warlord who swept out of the steppe and killed his way across the world, leaving pyramids of skulls behind him. The largest land empire in history, built on pure brutality. And if that's who he was, then the question on his mind before a battle is obvious. How many do I kill? How fast can I win? But that archer breaks the whole picture. Because a man who only cares about winning would never execute someone who just handed him a victory. And a man who only cares about killing would never spare the enemy who nearly killed him. Those two decisions don't fit the savage. They fit something stranger and far more deliberate. Genghis wasn't asking how to win. Winning was the part he was good at. The question underneath every battle, the one he was really asking, was about the men standing next to him, not the ones in front of him. And to understand why, you have to go back to a child left to die on an empty plain. His name then was Temüjin, and he was around 9 years old when his world ended the first time. His father, a minor clan chief, was poisoned by a rival tribe while traveling. With him gone, something happened that tells you everything about the world Temüjin grew up in. His own clan, the people who were supposed to protect a chief's widow and her children, simply abandoned them. They packed up and rode off and left Temüjin's mother alone on the steppe with a handful of young children and no protection at all. Not killed, discarded, left to starve. Which is worse, in a way. And here's the thing about the steppe. It is not a place where you survive alone. Survival was the group. Food, defense, everything came from belonging to a band of people who had your back. To be cast out wasn't an insult. It was a death sentence quietly handed down. The people who owed his family loyalty looked at a grieving widow and her kids and decided they weren't worth the food. That is the seed, right there. Not ambition, not bloodlust. A boy learning at 9 that the people who are supposed to protect you are exactly the ones who will leave you to die the moment you stop being useful. Loyalty, the thing everyone around him talked about, was a lie. It evaporated the instant it cost something. And they survived, barely, on roots and fish and whatever they could scrape from the land. And then comes the detail that should disturb you, because it shows how deep the wound already ran. Temüjin had an older half-brother named Begta. They quarrelled, the way starving children do, over food. But Begta, as the eldest surviving male, was in a position to one day control the family, even to take Temüjin's own mother as a wife by steppe custom. He was a rival for the one thing Temüjin had left. So Temüjin and his younger brother hunted Begta down and killed him. A boy murdered his own brother, not in rage, but because he had already learned that the threat closest to you is the most dangerous one of all. His mother was horrified, but the lesson was already set in him like a bone that heals crooked. Watch the people beside you. They are the ones who can destroy you. And the world kept confirming it. He was captured by a rival clan and enslaved, forced to wear a wooden collar called a kang, a heavy yoke locked around the neck and arms so a prisoner can't even feed himself or run. He escaped, but think about what that does to a mind. He'd been abandoned by his own people, threatened by his own brother, and locked in a collar by his enemies. Every direction he looked, the danger was human, and it was close. So by the time Temüjin became a man, he didn't have ordinary ambition. He had a problem he needed to solve, and the problem was loyalty itself. How do you build something that won't abandon you the way everything already had? Watch how that one question reshapes everything he touches. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it in a single decision he makes. Most steppe leaders rewarded blood. Your cousins got the good positions, your clan got the spoils. Loyalty was assumed to run along family lines. Temüjin tore that up completely. He started promoting men based on one thing only: whether they had proven they could be trusted. A shepherd's son could rise to command armies. A man from a defeated enemy tribe could become an inner general. Bloodline meant nothing to him, because bloodline had abandoned him on the steppe. Tested loyalty meant everything, because it was the only thing that ever hadn't. And now the two puzzles from the beginning click into place. The archer who shot his horse, whose name was Jeb, confessed openly when he could have lied. To Temüjin, that was the most valuable thing a man could show him. Here is someone who tells the truth even when it could get him killed. Someone whose word holds when it costs him. That is the rarest substance in the world to a man who was left to die by people whose word meant nothing. So he didn't just spare Jeb, he elevated him, because Jeb had passed the only test that mattered. And the men who betrayed their own masters to win his favor, they failed that same test completely. A man who hands you his lord is showing you exactly what he is. He's showing you that loyalty, for him, bends to advantage, which means the day you stop being the advantage, he'll hand you over too. Temüjin had been that abandoned man once. He was never going to surround himself with people who'd do the abandoning. So he killed them, not out of cruelty, but as a kind of quality control. Betrayal disqualifies you, even when the betrayal benefits me. This is the question finally. Before every battle, the savage warlord of legend was supposedly asking how many he could slaughter. But the real Genghis was asking something colder and far more revealing. Who here can I actually trust? Who beside me will hold when it costs them? Because he knew, better than anyone alive, that armies don't usually die from the enemy in front. They die from the betrayal within. He'd lived it. He built his entire empire as the answer to that question. A structure where loyalty was sacred law, where betrayers died, where a man's word was worth more than his blood, where the people beside you had been tested until you knew they would not run. He took the chaos of the steppe, the every clan for itself world that had thrown away a 9-year-old, and he replaced it with the one thing he'd never had: people who would not leave. But here's the question that should be rising now. If he solved loyalty, if he finally built the thing that wouldn't abandon him, then why does the story end in such loneliness? What does it cost a man to spend his whole life unable to stop asking who's about to betray him? It cost him the one person he'd loved like a brother. And this is where the whole story turns over. His name was Jamukha. When Temüjin was young, before any of the conquering, he and Jamukha became Anda. It means sworn blood brothers, and it is the deepest bond steppe culture had. They mingled their blood. They slept under one blanket. For a while, in a life that had given Temüjin almost nothing, Jamukha was the thing he'd been starving for. A brother who chose him. Loyalty that wasn't taken but given. As Temüjin rose, the steppe wasn't big enough for two leaders, and the two blood brothers ended up on opposite sides of a war for everything. The man who understood loyalty more deeply than anyone, who had built his whole life around it, watched his closest bond curdle into his greatest enmity. In the end, Temüjin won, and Jamukha was on the run. And then, the past came back around in the cruelest possible shape. Jamukha's own followers, hoping to win favor with the victor, captured their lord and dragged him to Temüjin. And Temüjin had them executed. Of course he did. They'd betrayed their master, and that was the one unforgivable thing in his entire universe. He killed the men who delivered him the very enemy he'd been hunting, because they were the abandoners, and he was still, underneath everything, the abandoned boy. But then comes the moment that breaks the whole thing open. With Jamukha standing in front of him defeated, Temüjin offered him his hand. He offered to be brothers again. After all the war, all the blood, he reached back for the one bond that had ever felt freely given. He wanted his Anda back. And Jamukha refused. He said there could only be one sun in the sky. He knew there was no real way back, that he would always be a rival, a crack in the very structure Temüjin had built his life to seal. So he asked only for an honorable death, a death without the spilling of blood, the noble end in their culture. And Temüjin, weeping, granted it. He had his blood brother put to death without a drop of blood spilled, and he buried him with honor. Now look at what loyalty actually cost him. The man who built an empire so that no one would ever abandon him again had to destroy the one person he'd wanted to keep. The worldview that protected him from betrayal also made it impossible to simply love a brother and let it be enough. He couldn't trust the bond because he couldn't trust anything he hadn't tested and controlled. And Jamukha was the one thing he could never control. So the wound that made him one, and the boy who'd been left on the steppe, ended up doing the leaving himself, to the last person he'd ever called brother. We can't crawl inside an 800-year-old grief and measure it exactly. The chronicle that tells us most of this, the Mongols' own secret history, mixes record with legend. But the shape of it is hard to look away from. He offered his hand, he was refused, and he wept. So before every battle, what was Genghis Khan really asking? Not how many he could kill, not even quite how to win. He was asking the question the steppe had carved into him at 9 years old. The question he never once stopped asking for the rest of his life. Who beside me is going to leave? Who here, when it costs them, will hand me over the way my own people handed over my mother and me to the wind and the cold? The conqueror was the abandoned boy, grown up and armed, and he never stopped checking the ground beneath his feet to make sure it was still solid this time. The empire, all of it, the largest the world has ever seen, was a wall he kept building against a single childhood memory. People who would not abandon him. Loyalty he could finally count on. And in a way that's almost unbearable, he got it, and it still wasn't enough. He built the thing that wouldn't leave. He surrounded himself with men who would die before betraying him, and most of them did exactly that. But the price of a life spent asking who's about to betray you is that you can never stop asking. Not even of a brother. Especially not of a brother. The wound that built the empire was the same wound that emptied it of the one bond he actually wanted. He spent his life making sure he would never again be the boy standing alone on empty ground. And he died the most powerful man on earth, having had to push away with his own hand the only person who'd ever stood on that ground beside him by choice. He didn't conquer the world because he wanted it. He conquered it because he was still, somewhere underneath, a 9-year-old waiting to see who would ride off and leave him this time. So he made sure he was the one holding all the horses. And that's where I have to leave him, because that's the part I can't quite settle. So I'll put the question to you the way it's been sitting with me. If the people who were supposed to protect you abandoned you as a child, would you have built walls too? And would you have been able to take the hand back when the brother you'd lost was finally standing in front of you? I genuinely don't know what I'd have done. Tell me where you land in the comments, because I think this one's worth arguing about. If sitting on this couch and digging under these old stories with me is your kind of thing, subscribe and ride along. Thanks for being here.